Some moments in life seem small, almost forgettable, yet they etch themselves deep into the heart like destiny had placed them there long before we ever arrived. That day, a quiet Saturday afternoon at the mall, filled with nothing out of the ordinary, became the beginning of something no one could have expected. She wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads. Her shirt was a little wrinkled at the shoulders, hair tied in a loose knot, her steps quick and quiet like someone always running late to life. She wasn't there to shop, just to grab the cheapest bottle of vitamin gummies for her little niece back home. As she fumbled for coins in her jacket pocket, she heard it. A soft cry. Not loud, not panicked, more embarrassed than scared. She turned her head and saw a young boy, maybe 7 years old, crouched near a bench, his hands over his nose, a trickle of blood staining his fingers. No one noticed. The crowd flowed past, heels clicking steadily across polished tile. She didn't think. She walked straight to him, crouched to meet his eyes, and pulled out a square, carefully folded handkerchief from her pocket. One her mother had once given her long ago. "Don't tilt your head back," she said softly. "Lean forward a little. That's it. I'll hold this for you." The boy only nodded, tears still clinging to his cheeks. Up on the second floor, behind tinted glass reflecting soft afternoon light, a man stood still, motionless, his phone halfway to his ear. He didn't dial. He didn't blink. His eyes stayed locked on the scene below. It wasn't that the boy was his son. That part was obvious. It was the woman, or rather, the way she moved, the way she held the boy's hand, gently but firmly, the calm in her voice. It wasn't her face or her voice that struck him. It was the shape of her kindness. It reminded him of someone, of a time, of a woman he had once loved, or maybe someone he had once lost. She led the boy into the pharmacy, still holding the handkerchief over his nose, her other hand gently patting his back like a lullaby with no sound. The clerk glanced up, startled, then rushed to hand her gauze and antiseptic. "Are you here with your parents?" she asked once they'd found a bench near the counter. The boy shook his head. "I came with my driver, but he went somewhere." She nodded, her voice steady. "That's okay. Let's get you cleaned up. You're going to be just fine." She had no idea that every small motion, her voice, her hands, her patience was being watched, not by a stranger, but by someone whose heart hadn't moved in years. The man upstairs, the one watching, was Marcus Ellington, CEO of one of the largest investment firms in the Western States. A man who made impossible decisions without blinking, who hadn't cried in over a decade. But that day, when he saw her kneel down in the middle of a crowded mall to press a handkerchief against his son's nose, he didn't move. He was afraid. Afraid that if he stepped closer, he might shatter whatever fragile, beautiful moment this was. Afraid she might look up and meet his eyes, and he wasn't sure his heart could take that. She didn't know Marcus. She didn't know that the boy was Henry Ellington, the only son of a man whose name graced the covers of business magazines. She saw only a child who needed help, and that was enough for her. When the bleeding stopped and the boy had calmed down, she brought him to the customer service desk and asked if they could help locate his guardian. Moments later, the frantic driver rushed over, apologizing profusely. She simply smiled, handed over the boy, and slipped away before thanks could fully form. "Be more careful," she said gently, and then she was gone. Marcus came down minutes too late. All he caught was the tail end of her figure disappearing down the corridor. He didn't chase her. He just stood there, among cold lights and polished marble, where he had walked countless times but never truly seen anything, until today. Until now. He bent down and picked up the handkerchief Henry had clutched. In the corner, stitched in tiny letters, was a single initial, E. He looked at his son. "Did she tell you her name?" The boy shook his head. Marcus pressed the cloth against his palm. Somewhere in his memory, like an echo of something he'd buried long ago, he could still hear her voice. "Don't lean back. Look down just a little. There you go." And in that moment, he knew he had to find her. 2 weeks passed, but Marcus couldn't shake her from his mind. The handkerchief stayed folded in the inside pocket of his blazer. He didn't tell anyone why. Not his assistant. Not even Henry. Some things felt too delicate to explain. Each night, when Henry had gone to bed, he'd find himself reaching into his coat for that square of faded cloth. He would run his thumb across the embroidered E, wondering who she was, why she had that same calmness, that quiet strength, that way of touching lives and disappearing before anyone could thank her. And maybe it wasn't even about her. Maybe it was what she reminded him of, a part of himself he thought had died the day Henry's mother passed. Until that moment at the mall, he hadn't realized how numb he'd become. And yet, somehow, in those 10 minutes, watching a woman kneel for a child that wasn't hers, he had felt more alive than he had in years. Then came the morning Henry refused to go to school. He wasn't sick, wasn't tired, just quiet, curled up on the couch with that same blue hoodie, eyes fixed on nothing. Marcus sat beside him, waiting. Finally, Henry spoke. "I liked her." Marcus looked at him, caught off guard. "The lady from the mall," Henry added. "She smelled like the vanilla cake Mom used to bake. And she didn't tell me to stop crying." Marcus's chest tightened. She just stayed. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Henry turned to him. "Can we find her?" Marcus didn't know how to answer. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to promise his son that some people don't just vanish into crowds. But life wasn't like that. And yet, something in Henry's eyes made him stand up and grab his coat. "Let's go," he said. "Where?" The boy blinked. "To where we last saw her." So they returned to the mall. Marcus had no plan, no logic. He simply walked the same path, holding Henry's hand, scanning every corner, past the pharmacy, past the bench. Nothing, until they reached the bookstore near the exit. Henry tugged his sleeve. "That's her." Marcus turned, heart skipping. And there she was, bent over a stack of used paperbacks, her hair falling to one side, a soft denim jacket worn at the elbows. Still simple, still quiet, still her. But this time, she looked up. Their eyes met, and for a second, Marcus forgot how to breathe. She stood slowly, unsure whether to smile or step away. Marcus took one careful step forward, then another. "I think you helped someone very important to me," he said gently. She looked confused, then noticed Henry standing beside him. Her face lit up with recognition. "Oh," she breathed, kneeling down. "You're okay." Henry nodded. "Thanks to you." She smiled, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm glad." Marcus watched her closely. There was something about her presence, something oddly familiar yet completely foreign, like hearing an old song you hadn't realized you missed. He cleared his throat. "We never got your name." She hesitated. "Elena." Marcus blinked. "Elena," the initial on the handkerchief. "Elena," he repeated, tasting the name. The fit. "I'm Marcus. This is Henry." He paused. "Thank you for that day." She smiled politely. It was nothing, really, but Marcus knew better. Nothing about it was nothing. They stood in silence for a beat too long. Then Elena glanced at her watch. "I should go. My shift starts in 20 minutes. You work around here?" She nodded toward a small cafe across the street. "Just part-time. Barista. And sometimes I help in the bookstore when they need." Of course, she would be the kind of person who wore two jobs with a quiet grace. Marcus nodded. "Maybe we could stop by sometime?" Elena hesitated, her eyes flicking from Marcus to Henry. Then she gave a soft nod. "If you like caramel lattes, I make a decent one." And just like that, she walked away again. But this time, Marcus didn't feel like she was disappearing. That night, as Henry fell asleep beside a worn-out picture book from the store, Marcus sat in his office, holding the handkerchief again. Only now, it didn't feel like a mystery. Felt like a beginning. He looked out the window into the city where everything moved too fast and felt too shallow. But tonight, something was different. Someone had slowed him down. The next morning, he walked into the cafe. And there she was, behind the counter, tying her apron, laughing softly with an elderly customer. He didn't speak at first, just watched. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus Ellington ordered a coffee. Not because he needed caffeine, but because someone remembered how to care for his son without expecting anything in return. Because sometimes the smallest kindness is the thing that changes everything. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't just save his son. She saved a piece of him too. It became a quiet ritual. Every Saturday morning, Marcus would bring Henry to the small cafe across from the bookstore. He never announced it, never admitted it was more than coincidence. But the truth was, they both wanted to see her. Elena always smiled when they walked in, her eyes softening in that way that made the world feel just a little less sharp. Henry would run to the counter and ask if he could help stir milk or wipe tables. And Marcus, he would sit by the window pretending to scroll through emails, but really, he was watching her. She moved like someone who had spent a long time hiding in the background of other people's stories. Always gentle, always quiet, but never small. One morning, while Henry was in the restroom and the shop had gone still, Marcus spoke without thinking. "You remind me of someone I once knew." Elena turned, surprised. Oh, she was kind, soft-spoken, but had this fire inside. She used to hum while she cleaned. Always the same melody. I haven't heard it in years. Elena's hands paused, barely noticeable. Her voice dropped just slightly. "Do you remember the tune?" Marcus nodded. He hummed a few notes under his breath, the rhythm clumsy at first, then clearer. Elena didn't answer, but her back straightened, her shoulders tensed. And then, slowly, she picked up the coffee cup in front of her, and without realizing, hummed the next line. Marcus froze. His eyes narrowed. "How do you know that song?" Elena looked startled. I don't know. It's just, I've always known it. I thought maybe I made it up." "No," Marcus said, voice lower now. "No, you didn't." He stood slowly, the air between them suddenly heavy. "My wife used to hum it when she was pregnant with Henry. She wrote it. She called it his lullaby." Elena's lips parted, but no sound came out. Marcus stepped closer. "Why do you know it, Elena?" She looked down, clutching the coffee cup so tightly her knuckles turned white. "I worked at St. Joseph's Hospital 3 years ago, pediatric ward, just a volunteer mostly, but I remember a woman. She was in labor, complications. There was music playing in the background. That melody. It was the last thing I remember before." She stopped. Before what? Marcus didn't press. Not yet. Instead, he walked back to the window and sat down. His mind was spinning. Couldn't be coincidence. That night, he opened a box he hadn't touched in years. Inside was a photo. His wife, glowing, standing outside St. Joseph's, hand on her stomach. And behind her, blurry but unmistakable, stood a young girl in scrubs, barely more than a teenager, a clipboard in hand, her eyes downcast. "Elena." He stared at the picture long into the night. The next day, he returned to the cafe alone. Elena was wiping tables, her hair pinned up, sleeves rolled. "I found a photo," Marcus said gently. "You were in it, outside the hospital." Elena stopped moving. "I need to know something," he continued. "That night, the night Henry was born, were you there?" She nodded slowly. "I wasn't supposed to be in that room," she whispered. "I was only shadowing, but everything went wrong so fast. No one could find the nurse. I stayed. I held her hand." Marcus's chest tightened. She was scared, and then she asked me to sing to her. So I hummed the tune. She squeezed my hand. And then, she was gone. Elena's voice cracked. "I never told anyone. I thought if I did, they'd say it was my fault, that I shouldn't have been there. So I left, changed cities, started over." Marcus looked at her, eyes glassy. "My wife died believing she was alone." "She wasn't," Elena whispered. "She said your name. She said, 'Tell Marcus. It's okay. He's going to be a good father.' But I didn't tell anyone, because I wasn't supposed to be there." Marcus took a breath like he'd forgotten how. All these years, he'd carried the guilt of not being there for her. not saying goodbye, not knowing if she was scared. But now he knew someone had stayed. Someone had held her hand. Someone had given her peace. He stepped forward. "Elena," he said, voice low and steady. "You didn't do anything wrong. You gave her comfort. And you gave me a second chance, twice." She blinked. "Twice. You helped Henry. And you helped me remember how to feel again." She turned away, shoulders trembling. "I didn't mean for you to find out. But I'm glad I did." There was silence between them. Not heavy, not awkward, just full of everything that had never been said. Then Marcus reached into his coat pocket. He held out the handkerchief. "The E," he said. "I think it was meant to find its way back to you." She took it with shaking fingers. And in that moment, something in both of them softened. Not because the past was fixed, but because maybe they didn't have to carry it alone anymore. Henry was the first to notice the change. His dad smiled more. Not in that practiced, polite way, the one used at board meetings and charity galas, but in a quiet, thoughtful way, like his heart was remembering how. He listened longer. He lingered at bedtime, asking about dreams and dinosaurs. And sometimes he'd just watch Henry with this look in his eyes, like he was searching for something and finally finding it. It started with small things. They visited the cafe more often. Elena would bring extra cookies for Henry, sometimes with smiley faces drawn in frosting. Marcus would offer to carry crates from the back, even if no one asked. And then, on one rare rainy afternoon, when the shop emptied early and the world outside turned soft and gray, Henry fell asleep in the corner chair. Elena and Marcus sat across from each other in silence. "I used to think love was something you could build," Marcus said quietly, "like a business. If you worked hard enough, made the right decisions, it would just stay." Elena looked at him, waiting. "But it's not," he continued. "It's fragile. It needs to be held, not controlled. And I didn't understand that until it was too late." "You understand it now," she said softly. Marcus looked down. "Because of you." She shook her head. "Because of Henry." They both turned to the boy, sleeping with a crooked smile, a book still open on his chest. "He reminds me that love doesn't need to be perfect," Elena added. "Just real." Marcus reached across the table. He didn't touch her hand, just rested his fingers on the surface. "Close enough." "There's still so much I don't know about you," he said, "and so much of me that's not healed. But I don't want this to just be Saturdays and coffee." She didn't answer. Not right away. Instead, she opened the small notebook she always kept near the counter. Inside, on one of the back pages, was a rough sketch, childlike, simple. A boy with messy hair, a man holding a briefcase, and a woman in a cafe apron, all holding hands. Marcus stared at it. "Did you draw this?" "No," she said. "Henry did. Last week." There was silence again. Then Elena closed the notebook. "I don't want to replace anyone," she whispered. "I'm not trying to be a mother he doesn't remember, or a woman you used to love." "You're not replacing anyone," Marcus said. "You're becoming someone we're learning to love." Now, Elena's eyes welled up, but she didn't cry. She just nodded. And somehow that meant more. Weeks passed. The seasons shifted. The leaves turned gold, then bare. The world moved forward. And one Sunday morning, Marcus stood outside her apartment building, holding a small box. Inside it wasn't jewelry or keys or anything expensive, just the handkerchief freshly pressed and a note. It said, "You stayed with her when I couldn't. You helped my son when no one else saw him. And somehow you stayed with me too. This time, I'm not letting go." She opened the door. She didn't speak. She just stepped aside, letting him in. Later that evening, as Henry set the table with mismatched napkins and too many forks, he looked up and smiled. "This feels like home," he said. Neither of them corrected him, because it did. And in the softest of ways, with no grand declarations or sweeping music, something long broken had quietly begun to mend. Not with promises, but with presence. Not with perfection, but with love that stayed even when no one saw. And maybe that's all we ever needed. To be seen, to be stayed with, to be chosen again.